Okay, buckle up, because you won't believe the twisted truth lurking behind the perfect facade of my marriage. My husband David, a sweet, seemingly innocent software engineer, wasn't just having an affair. Oh no, that was just the tip of the iceberg. His little office romance with a colleague wasn't about love. It was a meticulously planned trap, designed to frame him for embezzling millions from his own company. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, but hell has nothing. On a cybersecurity expert whose husband is sleeping with the enemy, especially when that enemy is a criminal mastermind trying to ruin him, I used every digital weapon in my arsenal, every vulnerability I knew, not just to expose the cheating heart I married, but to utterly demolish the woman who thought she could play us both. This is the story of how I turned my grief into gigabytes of retribution. My life, externally, was the picture of modern success. Anya Sharma, 34, senior security architect at Apex Innovations, a tech giant whose name was synonymous with innovation and robust digital defenses. Ironic, wasn't. I earned a substantial six-figure salary, more than enough to comfortably afford our sleek apartment in downtown Seattle, the occasional luxury vacation, and the general ease that financial security brings. My husband, David Miller, also worked in big tech, albeit at a slightly smaller, less flashy firm, Innovate Solutions, as a lead software engineer. He was good at what he did, smart, dedicated. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, two tech nerds awkwardly trying to make small talk outside of a conference setting. It worked. We clicked over shared passions for obscure sci-fi and a mutual understanding of the demanding, often isolating nature of our careers. For the first few years, it was great. We built a life together, supporting each other through late nights and tough projects. But slowly, subtly, the cracks began to appear. They started, I think, with the money. When I got my last promotion, my salary jumped significantly, putting me firmly in a higher earning bracket than David. I never rubbed it in, never made a big deal of it, but I saw the change in him. A quiet withdrawal, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place at first. Resentment? Insecurity? He'd make offhand comments about my fancy title or the corporate ladder climbing, comments that felt less like teasing and more like jabs. Our conversations about work became less open, more guarded on his end. He seemed smaller in his own skin. Our sex life dwindled, replaced by tired excuses and early nights. Affection became a chore. I tried talking to him, asking if everything was okay, if he was happy. He'd brush me off, say he was just stressed with work, a big project coming up. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. My job was mentally taxing. The last thing I needed was turmoil at home. I buried myself deeper in my work, securing networks against sophisticated threats, while the biggest threat to my own life was brewing silently under my roof. The big project he mentioned turned out to be code for Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was a new addition to his team at Innovate Solutions, a project manager, bubbly, outgoing, everything I wasn't after, staring at lines of code and security logs for 12 hours a day. David started mentioning her, casually at first. Sarah had a good idea about the database structure. Sarah helped me with the client presentation. Then the mentions became more frequent, the tone shifting. A lightness entered his voice I hadn't heard in a long time. He started staying late more often, citing project deadlines. His phone, once left carelessly on the coffee table, was now glued to his hand, screen down. He'd jump when I entered the room if he was looking at it. Small things, easily dismissed as work stress, but my professional instincts, honed to spot anomalies in complex systems, were screaming. The pattern didn't fit the narrative. One rainy Tuesday evening, David was working late. Again. I was scrolling through social media, trying to distract myself from the gnawing anxiety in my gut. His laptop was open on the kitchen counter, left, there in what felt like a deliberate act of carelessness, or perhaps just exhaustion. My eyes, trained to scan for anything out of the ordinary, drifted to the screen. It was open to a team chat application, something proprietary to his company, not unlike Slack or Teams. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew I shouldn't look. Every fiber of my being screamed that this was a boundary I shouldn't cross. But the image of him holding his phone so protectively, the late nights, the distance, the need to know overwhelmed me. I moved closer, my fingers hovering over the trackpad. It was a group chat for his project team. I scrolled through, seeing typical work banter. Then I saw a private message thread. It was between David and Sarah Jenkins. The first few messages were work-related, discussions about tasks and deadlines. Harmless. My shoulders relaxed slightly. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Then I scrolled further. The tone shifted. Emojis appeared. Jokes that weren't. Work-related. Late-night messages. Can't stop thinking about our conversation today. You make these late nights bearable. Wish you were here right now. My blood ran cold. My fingers trembled as I scrolled faster. Pet names appeared. Sweetheart. Honey. Plans. To grab coffee that clearly weren't just coffee. References to meeting outside of work, to our secret. It was all there, laid bare in the cold blue light of the screen. An affair. My husband, the man who promised me forever, was having an affair. The pain hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer volume of deceit, the lies, the stolen moments, the emotional energy he was pouring into someone else while leaving me with the drained husk of his attention. I wanted to scream, to smash the laptop, to wake him up right then and confront him. But years of cybersecurity training kicked in. Panic is a vulnerability. Emotion can cloud judgment. I needed to think. I needed evidence. More than this fleeting glimpse. I closed the laptop, my mind racing. How could I get access to his phone? It was the primary communication tool. It would hold everything. He used a standard Android phone, nothing with cutting-edge, nation-state level security, unlike the devices I worked with daily. I knew the common vulnerabilities, the potential attack vectors. Social engineering was the easiest. Just ask. For his phone. Maybe distract him. Quickly access what I needed. But I didn't want him to know I was looking. Not yet. I wanted undeniable proof. Enough to leave no room for denial. My mind went into problem-solving mode, treating my own marriage as a network breach. I knew his phone's make and model. I knew his general habits. He wasn't the most diligent about updates. He found them annoying. This was a potential entry point. A known vulnerability in a slightly older version of the Android OS, combined with a specific app he used frequently, maybe a less than reputable free game or utility app he'd downloaded ages ago and forgotten about, could be exploited. It required physical access, but only for a short time, to install a discrete monitoring tool. The opportunity presented itself 2 nights later. David came home, exhausted, and fell asleep on the couch watching TV, his phone lying beside him. My heart pounded, a mixture of dread and cold resolve. This was it. I crept over, my movements silent. I picked up his phone, my fingers tracing the cool glass. Taking a deep breath, I quickly went to the settings, checking the OS version. Bingo. Slightly outdated. I knew the exploit. I needed to act fast. I connected his phone to my laptop via USB. My personal laptop, encrypted and secured, was my command. Center. I launched the script I had prepared, a small custom piece of code designed for remote monitoring and data extraction. It was illegal, I knew. A violation of privacy. But the woman who lay sobbing on the couch just days ago was gone, replaced by the security professional who saw a threat and moved to neutralize it. Morality was a luxury I couldn't afford when my entire life felt under attack. The script worked quickly, installing a discreet agent on his phone. It wouldn't show up as a normal app. It was designed to run in the background, collecting data, call logs, message transcripts, browse history, even GPS location if needed. It would compress and encrypt the data, sending it to a secure cloud, storage location I controlled. I disconnected the phone, placing it back exactly where I found it, my hands still shaking. For the next few days, I lived a double life. During the day, I was the sharp, focused security architect, protecting Apex innovations from the bad guys. At night, I was the spy in my own home, silently monitoring my husband's digital life. The data trickled in, encrypted packages, appearing in my cloud storage. I decrypted them, my stomach clenching with each new batch of messages. The affair was confirmed, explicitly and painfully. Messages filled with declarations of affection, plans for clandestine meetings, complaints about me. Reading his words, seeing him refer to our marriage as a burden or a mistake, was like being stabbed repeatedly. The initial shock gave way to a searing, cold rage. How could he? How could he do this to me after everything? The insecurity about my salary, the distance, the lies, it all coalesced into a monstrous betrayal. But then, buried within the mountain of infidelity, I found something else. Something far more sinister. Sarah's messages weren't just about their love. They were peppered with references to work, but not just project management. They talked about the plan, about moving the funds, about making it look like a system. Error. They mentioned specific account numbers, internal company protocols, and dates. I cross-referenced these messages with David's work emails, which the monitoring tool also captured. He was involved, but not in the way I initially feared. He wasn't a willing participant in something illicit. He was being manipulated. Sarah was using his access, his knowledge of the system architecture, to facilitate large-scale fund transfers. She was setting him up. The messages showed her subtly pushing him to make specific coding changes, to implement certain procedures, all under the guise of optimizing the system or meeting project requirements. She was building a digital paper trail that would point directly to him when the money vanished. The scale of the embezzlement was staggering. Her messages discussed moving millions, not thousands, but millions of dollars, from Innovate Solutions' corporate accounts to offshore accounts she controlled. Her plan was to execute the final transfer, trigger a system failure that would implicate David, and then disappear. The affair wasn't born of genuine attraction. It was a tool of manipulation, a way to get close to David, to gain his trust, and access to the systems she needed to exploit. She was using his insecurity about our financial situation, his vulnerability, to ensnare him in her criminal enterprise. The shock of the affair was instantly overshadowed by the terrifying reality of Sarah's scheme. My husband, the man who had betrayed me so deeply, was also about to become a pawn in a multi-million-dollar fraud, potentially facing years in prison. The cold rage shifted, transforming into a fierce protective instinct. He had hurt me, yes, but he was also a victim of a far more dangerous predator. My revenge, then, had a new target, a new, more urgent purpose. It wasn't just about exposing the affair. It was about dismantling Sarah Jenkins' life, not just professionally, but legally. She wanted to destroy my husband's life and steal millions? I would ensure she lost everything, and I would use every bit of my expertise to do it. My focus shifted entirely to Sarah. I needed undeniable proof of her embezzlement plan and her intent to frame David. Her phone, her laptop, her cloud storage. These were my new targets. I knew enough about Innovate Solutions' network structure from David's work discussions to estimate the security protocols they likely had in place. They wouldn't be as robust as Apex Innovations, but they wouldn't be negligible either. This phase of my operation required more caution, more technical finesse. Hacking into a third party's devices without their knowledge is significantly riskier than accessing a spouse's device. I spent days researching Sarah online, piecing together her digital footprint. social media, public records, any leaked data I could find related to her email addresses or usernames. I looked for potential weaknesses, common passwords, old accounts she might have forgotten to secure, connections to less secure public networks she might have used. I found a potential entry point through a vulnerability in an older version of a popular cloud storage service she used for personal files, linked to an old email address she hadn't updated the security settings on in years. It wasn't a direct path to her primary work devices, but it was a start. Once inside her personal cloud storage, I found documents, photos, and crucially backups of her personal phone. Accessing the phone backup was a goldmine. It contained everything: call logs, message threads, including the ones with David. From her side, financial transaction notifications, emails, browse history. As I sifted through the data, the full, horrifying scope of her operation became clear. There were detailed spreadsheets outlining the fund transfer plan, communications with offshore contacts, even drafted fake system reports designed to implicate David. She wasn't just an opportunistic cheater. She was a sophisticated cybercriminal. Simultaneously, I worked on accessing her work laptop. This was trickier. Corporate networks have layers of security. But I had information from David's messages, details about the network architecture, the specific software used, even some credentials he had innocently shared with Sarah for project collaboration. I used this information, combined with a carefully crafted spear phishing email targeting Sarah's work account, designed to look like an internal IT notification requiring her to log in to a fake portal to gain a foothold. Once she clicked the link and entered her credentials, I had access. Navigating Innovate Solutions Network was like moving through a digital maze, but I was the Minotaur. I bypassed their security protocols, leaving minimal trace. I accessed her work files, her communication logs, her access history within their financial systems. The evidence was overwhelming, damning. Screenshots of financial transactions being prepared, encrypted communications with accomplices, internal memos she had altered, and of course, the continued messages with David, still playing the part of the smitten colleague while plotting his downfall. I worked tirelessly, fueled by a potent mixture of rage and determination. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every line of code I cracked, every encrypted file I opened felt like another nail in Sarah Jenkins' coffin. I downloaded and meticulously organized every piece of incriminating evidence: financial records, message transcripts, access logs, forged documents. I created secure, encrypted backups of everything, storing them in multiple locations. Also compiled the messages between Sarah and David that focused purely on the affair, the emotional evidence of his betrayal. My next step was to present the evidence to the right people at Innovate Solutions. This couldn't be done anonymously. I needed to be credible. I drafted a comprehensive report, laying out the timeline of events, the technical details of Sarah's scheme, the amount of money involved. I estimated it to be around $5 million based on the transaction plans, and the evidence that showed her attempting to frame David. I included copies of the most damning messages and financial records, carefully redacted to protect some sensitive company information where possible, but leaving enough to be undeniable. I decided to contact their chief legal counsel, a woman named Eleanor Vance, whose profile I found on LinkedIn. A quick search revealed she had a strong reputation for integrity. I sent her an encrypted email from a secure, untraceable account I had set up years ago for testing purposes. The subject line was stark: urgent, potential multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme and employee framing at Innovate Solutions. The response was swift. Within hours, I received a reply from Ms. Vance's office asking for a secure video call. They were taking this seriously. I prepared for the call like I would for a major security briefing at Apex Innovations. I organized my evidence digitally, ready to share my screen and walk them through the findings. I explained who I was: Anya Sharma, a cybersecurity professional at Apex Innovations, and David Miller's wife. I laid out the situation calmly, factually, presenting the technical evidence of Sarah's network intrusion, the financial records showing the planned transfers, and the communications that proved her intent to frame David. I didn't dwell on the affair unless it directly intersected with her manipulative actions related to the crime. Ms. Vance and the head of security for Innovate Solutions, who had joined the call, listened intently. They asked sharp, technical questions, testing my understanding of their systems and my methods. I answered truthfully, admitting I had accessed devices I wasn't authorized to, but explaining that I had done so to uncover a significant crime and protect my husband from being wrongly accused. I knew the legal risks I was taking, but exposing Sarah and saving David was paramount. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, Ms. Vance spoke. "Ms. Sharma, this is incredibly serious. The evidence you've presented, if accurate, this is a sophisticated, large-scale fraud." "It is accurate," I stated firmly. "I have taken every precaution to verify the data. The artifacts are consistent across multiple sources I accessed. They assured me they would launch an immediate, discreet internal investigation based on the information I provided. They asked for the encrypted evidence files, which I transferred securely. They emphasized the need for confidentiality and asked me to refrain from discussing this with anyone, including David, until they had completed their initial assessment. The next few days were agonizing. I continued my life as normally as possible, working, coming home, interacting with David, all while knowing the storm that was brewing. He remained distant, preoccupied, still glued to his phone. I watched him, a complicated mix of anger and concern churning inside me. He had hurt me deeply, but he was oblivious to the far greater danger he was in. Then came the news, a short email from Ms. Vance. "Ms. Sharma, our investigation has corroborated your findings. We have involved law enforcement. The individual in question has been apprehended. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Sarah Jenkins was arrested for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The amount she attempted to steal was indeed in the millions. The internal investigation at Innovate Solutions, aided by my evidence, quickly uncovered the extent of her scheme and the damning digital trail she had left. The relief was immense, a tidal wave washing over the tension I had been carrying for weeks. David was safe. He wouldn't be framed, wouldn't go to prison for a crime he didn't commit. But the relief was immediately followed by the cold, hard reality of what was left. My marriage, the affair, his betrayal. When David came home that evening, he looked pale and shaken. News of Sarah's arrest had clearly spread through his company like wildfire. He knew she was the co-worker he had been seeing. Did you hear about Sarah?" he stammered, avoiding my eyes. I looked at him, the man I had married, the man who had broken my heart and whose life I had just saved. The urge to unleash my rage, to scream about the affair, about his lies, about his weakness that Sarah had exploited, was almost overwhelming. But I held back. I needed to be strategic, to control the narrative, just as I had controlled the digital investigation. "Yes, David," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. "I heard about Sarah. I know everything." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. "Everything? What do you mean, everything? About us?" "About you and Sarah," I clarified, letting the weight of those words hang in the air. "About the affair, and about the fact that she wasn't just sleeping with you, David. She was using you, setting you up to take the fall for embezzling millions from your company." His face drained of color. He stared at me, speechless. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I walked over to my laptop, which I had deliberately left open on the counter. I opened a folder containing the affair-related messages I had extracted from his and Sarah's phones. "You were so careful with your phone, David," I said, my voice laced with a bitterness I couldn't entirely hide. "But not careful enough. I'm a cybersecurity professional. Finding vulnerabilities, accessing data, it's what I do. You left enough breadcrumbs. And when I started looking for the affair, I found something much bigger. I found her plan to ruin you. I showed him the messages, the pet names, the plans, and then I showed him the other messages. The ones detailing the embezzlement, the framing, the cold, calculating way Sarah saw him. He read, his face a mask of horror and shame. When he finished, he looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Anya, I messed up so badly. I don't know what to say. How could you, David? I finally let the pain seep into my voice. How could you do this to me? To us? And how could you be so blind? So easily manipulated? He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. Don't touch me, I said softly, but with an gang tie edge. Not yet. I told him everything. How I grew suspicious, how I accessed his phone, the days I spent watching his betrayal unfold in digital form, the shock of discovering Sarah's criminal plan, the hours I spent hacking her devices, gathering the evidence, contacting his company, and the risk I took doing it. I laid it all out, not just the facts, but the emotional toll it had taken on me. He listened, his head bowed in shame. He admitted his insecurity about my salary, how Sarah had preyed on that, flattering him, making him feel important and desired when he felt diminished at home. He claimed the affair wasn't love, but a desperate, pathetic attempt to feel better about himself. It was a weak excuse, but in his eyes, I saw a genuine understanding of the magnitude of his mistakes, both the betrayal and the naivety that almost cost him his freedom. I saved you, David, I said, the words heavy with unspoken complexity. I saved you from prison. I exposed her crime. I risked everything to do it, while you were breaking my heart with her. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude, remorse, and fear. Why? Why did you do it after what I did? Because despite everything, David, I said, the truth raw and painful, I didn't want to see your life destroyed. Because even though you betrayed me, you were still the man I married, and you were being used and targeted by a criminal. And maybe part of me still loves you. That night was a turning point. The immediate crisis was averted. Sarah was in jail, facing serious charges. David was safe, his career at Innovate Solutions bruised but not broken. The company quietly handled his involvement as that of a manipulated employee who reported the issue internally, albeit indirectly. But our marriage was shattered, the pieces scattered and sharp. Forgiving David wasn't a single act. It was a long, arduous process. The betrayal of the affair, the casual cruelty of his messages with Sarah, the fact that his insecurity had led him down this path, it left deep scars. We started therapy, a neutral ground to navigate the wreckage. It was painful, filled with difficult conversations and raw emotions. I struggled to reconcile the man I married with the man who had lied to me so easily. He had to confront his own weaknesses, his insecurity, and the devastating consequences of his actions. The revenge, the exposure of Sarah, the protection of David. It had been a cold, focused mission. There was a grim satisfaction in seeing her face the consequences of her actions. I had used my skills not for corporate security, but for personal justice, a dangerous line to cross, but one I didn't regret given the circumstances. I had protected my husband from a criminal, even if he had simultaneously hurt me profoundly. Our relationship didn't bounce back quickly. The trust was broken, a fragile thing we had to rebuild brick by painful brick. There were days I looked at him and saw only the betrayal, days he looked at me with guilt and apprehension. My higher salary was no longer a source of his insecurity, but a stark reminder of the crisis we had endured. A crisis I had, ironically, used my well-compensated skills to resolve. The experience changed me fundamentally. It hardened me in some ways, making me more wary, more guarded. But it also revealed a strength and resourcefulness I hadn't fully appreciated. I had faced a double betrayal, emotional and criminal, and I had used my intellect and skills to dismantle the threat, piece by digital piece. Sarah Jenkins served time for her crimes. Innovate Solutions implemented stricter security protocols, thanks to the vulnerabilities I had exposed in the process of gathering evidence. David and I, we are still together. The laughter returns sometimes, tentative at first, then stronger. The physical distance slowly closed. But the scar remains, a reminder of the time our lives intersected with a cold, calculated criminal, and how the tools I used to protect the digital world became the weapons I wielded to save my own. It's a fragile peace, built on honesty, therapy, and the shared, terrible secret of how close we came to losing everything, and how I, the cybersecurity wife, became the architect of our survival and her downfall.